The cowboy found the runaway bride. Starving by the road, he gave her his meal and rode away hungry. The desert road stretched endless under a punishing sun, a ribbon of dust that shimmered and vanished at the horizon like a promise meant to be broken. A wagon's wheel tracks still scored the earth, leading nowhere anyone sane would follow. By the roadside lay a torn white dress, the hem caked with dirt, the lace browned from sweat and time. Inside it, curled like a child trying to remember warmth, was a woman whose breath came shallow and slow. Her veil was gone, her hair tangled and sunburned at the edges, her lips cracked. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, hadn't slept since the night she ran from a marriage arranged for dowry, not love. The wedding feast had turned to shouting, and by dawn she'd fled with nothing but a loaf of bread that dried to stone before she reached the open land. Her name was Clara May Dunn, but names meant little out here. Hunger stripped people to what they could endure. The sound of hooves came slow from the west, steady and unhurried, the kind of rhythm belonging to a man who'd already seen too much to rush anymore. He rode a worn, roan horse, his hat pulled low, his shirt sun-bleached and dust-streaked. His name was Eli Ward, a cowboy by habit, not ambition, a man who fixed fences, hauled water, and kept mostly to himself. When he saw her on the road, he reined in without a word. For a moment, he thought she was dead. Then she moved, only barely, her hand twitching against the dirt. He climbed down, boots crunching against the dry earth, and crouched beside her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, the word rough but kind. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching. "Please," she whispered, though she didn't know for what. He opened his saddlebag and pulled out the last of his jerky and a half-filled canteen. "Don't drink too fast," he said, lifting her head with surprising gentleness. She obeyed, though the first sip burned her throat. When she finished, she looked at him as though she didn't quite believe he was real. "Why are you stopping?" she rasped. He shrugged. "Can't ride past someone the buzzard's already picked out." She tried to smile, but her face refused the effort. "You'll lose daylight." "Daylight ain't going anywhere," he said. "You might." He tore the jerky into small pieces, offering one. She hesitated, shame flaring. "It's yours," she said. "You've got miles left." "So do you," he answered. When she finally took it, her hands shook. He watched her eat in silence, the kind of quiet that felt more like respect than pity. When she was done, he offered the last bit to her again, but she pushed it back toward him. "You'll go hungry." "I already am," he said simply, then smiled faintly. "But I'll ride better on it." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether mercy like that could be real. The wind stirred, carrying sand across their boots. "You shouldn't help me," she said. "I left a man who owns more guns than cattle." "I've outridden worse," he said, standing and offering his hand. "Can you walk?" She looked at her torn shoes and shook her head. "Not far." "Then don't," he said, slipping an arm beneath her shoulders. She flinched at the touch, then let herself be lifted. He placed her on his horse, adjusting the stirrup so she wouldn't fall. She clung to the saddle horn, trembling, eyes filling with something that wasn't just weakness. It was disbelief. He mounted behind her, the reins loose in his hands. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "Wherever's not here," he said. As the horse began to move, she glanced back once at the road she'd escaped, the one littered with broken bread crusts and tears that had dried before they hit the ground. Ahead, the sun bled into copper light, the sky burning itself out over the endless plain. For the first time since she ran, Clara felt something unfamiliar, a breath that didn't hurt. And though Eli Ward said nothing, his silence rode beside her like a prayer. By sundown, the desert had cooled, turning gold to gray and heat to a kind of brittle quiet that made every sound carry farther than it should. The horse moved slow, its steady gait rocking Clara between exhaustion and uneasy wakefulness. She clutched the saddle horn like an anchor, her body aching from hunger that no jerky or kindness could erase. Behind her, Eli rode silent, the faint creak of leather and the soft jingle of his bridle the only proof that he was real and not another mirage. The scent of sage drifted on the wind, sharp and dry, and somewhere far off a coyote called into the coming dark. When they reached a dry riverbed, Eli pulled the reins and dismounted, helping her down before she could protest. Her legs buckled, but his hands caught her again, steady and unhurried. "You'll drink," he said. "There's water here yet." He knelt near a hollow in the sand and began to dig with his hands until damp earth showed beneath. Clara watched, too weak to offer help, her breath shallow. When water finally pooled, dark and clean, he filled a tin cup and handed it to her. "Slow," he said again, and she obeyed, though each sip tasted like salvation. The coolness revived her enough to whisper, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer right away. He sat back on his heels, looking out toward the horizon where the sky met the earth in a thin, trembling line. "I seen enough folks die because no one bothered to stop," he said finally. "Don't sit right with me." "You don't even know who I am," she said, the shame she thought she'd buried rising again. "Don't need to," he replied. "You're somebody who fell. That's all the knowing I need." She looked at him, startled by the simplicity. "And you? Who are you when you're not saving strangers?" "Hungry," he said, deadpan, then almost smiled. "And tired of riding alone?" The moment hung soft between them, lit by the fading sun. She wanted to ask more, to know why a man like him still believed in stopping for people the world had already left behind. But words felt too heavy for the quiet they'd built. He stood, brushing the sand from his hands, and took the last crust of his own bread from the saddlebag, dividing it cleanly. "Half," he said, holding one piece out. "It's all that's left." She shook her head. "You already gave me your share." "Then we're even," he said. "I can't take more from you." "You ain't taking," he replied. "You're eating." His tone left no room for refusal. She took it, fingers brushing his. They ate in silence while the sun bled out behind the hills, the kind of meal that filled the heart more than the stomach. When it was done, Eli poured the rest of the water into a small pouch for the horse, then tossed his hat aside and leaned back against a rock, his eyes half closed. "You got a name?" he asked at last. "Clara," she said quietly. "Clara May Dunn." "You got folks?" "Not anymore." "Then you got the same as me," he said. "Nothing but the road." She pulled her shawl tighter, watching the stars come out one by one. The air smelled faintly of dust and memory. "What happens tomorrow?" she asked. "We ride," he said simply. "Toward what?" "Wherever you stopped running from." His words struck deeper than she expected, because she hadn't realized until that moment that he was right. She'd been running not from the man she left, but from the mirror he made her hold to herself. She didn't answer, and he didn't press. The night settled like a blanket, quiet and complete. Somewhere in the darkness, a whippoorwill sang, low and lonely. Eli added another piece of wood to the small fire they'd built, its light flickering over the hollows of his face. "You sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch. You'll be tired. Been tired before." She lay down near the fire, her head pillowed on her rolled shawl. As her eyes closed, she heard him hum under his breath, an old trail tune, half hymn, half memory. And as the flames danced lower, she thought that maybe silence wasn't emptiness at all. Maybe it was where mercy went to rest. Morning rose without ceremony, the kind of pale light that makes the world look unfinished. The fire had burned down to ash, and a faint chill lingered in the air as Clara opened her eyes to find Eli already saddling the horse. His movements were methodical, quiet, almost reverent. She sat up slowly, the ache in her legs a dull reminder of miles still owed to her mistakes. He glanced her way once, nodded, then handed her a small canteen half filled with water. "Drink," he said. "We've got ground to cover." She did as told, the metallic taste of the water cutting through the dryness in her mouth. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Nearest settlement's half a day east if we keep pace." "And then?" He tightened the strap around his saddle, his jaw setting. "Then you'll be somewhere that's not dying." She wanted to argue, to tell him she had nowhere to go, but the certainty in his tone silenced her. When he helped her mount, she felt again the quiet strength in his hands, steady, unshaking, without hesitation. They rode in silence for a long time, the trail winding between stretches of brittle grass and low hills that shimmered under the morning sun. The sky was endless, the kind that humbles even the proud. Clara kept her gaze low, watching the shadow of the horse move beside them, elongated and trembling like something alive. The rhythm of hooves was hypnotic, the sound of a life still moving forward whether she was ready or not. Around midday, they came across an abandoned homestead, a crumbling cabin with its door half torn away and a rusted plow buried in weeds. Eli stopped, scanning the place with cautious eyes. "We'll rest here," he said. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down, but she shook her head and tried to do it herself. Her foot slipped on the stirrup, and before she could fall, his arm caught her waist, pulling her upright. For a brief second, their faces were inches apart, both startled by the sudden closeness. She stepped back quickly, embarrassed. "I can manage," she said, her voice more defensive than she intended. "Never said you couldn't," he replied, turning away to check the horse's reins. They sat in the thin shade of the broken porch, sharing what little remained of his provisions. A handful of beans, a dry biscuit, and silence thick enough to taste. After a while, she said quietly, "You could have left me there. No one would have blamed you." He didn't look at her. "Would have blamed myself." "You don't even know me." "Don't have to," he said. "Hunger's the same in everyone." She studied him for a long time, the way his eyes stayed on the horizon even when he spoke. There was something lonely about him, not the kind that begged for company, but the kind that came from losing too much and learning to live with the echoes. "You always ride alone?" she asked. "Safer that way. For you or them?" "Both." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain from far away. She watched the horizon, the endlessness of it making her chest ache. "You think there's mercy left in a place like this?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes reflecting the hard light. "Mercy's not in the land," he said. "It's in the ones who keep walking through it." The words settled between them like a truth too simple to argue. For a long time, neither spoke. The air grew warmer, the stillness of the plains stretching around them like an ocean of dust. Eventually he rose, dusted off his hands, and said, "We should ride before the heat turns mean." She nodded, though her body begged to rest longer. As he mounted, he offered her his hand again. This time she didn't hesitate. When she took it, his grip tightened, not possessive, not fragile, but certain. As they rode on, the abandoned cabin faded behind them, swallowed by the sun. Clara didn't look back. She realized then that the hunger inside her had changed shape. It wasn't just for food anymore. It was for proof that kindness could still exist in a world that forgot how to stop. By late afternoon, the horizon darkened, a low wall of clouds building over the plains like judgment. The air shifted, the dry wind turning heavy with the taste of rain and iron. Eli noticed first, glancing up at the sky with a frown. "Storm's coming fast," he said. "We'll need cover." Clara followed his gaze, her stomach twisting at the sight of lightning flickering in the distance. The thought of open land under thunder made her chest tighten with the kind of fear she hadn't felt since the night she ran. They pushed the horse harder, the rhythm of its hooves quickening against the growing wind. Dust began to rise, the sun swallowed by rolling gray clouds that turned day into dusk. They rode until Eli spotted an outcrop of rock halfway buried in the side of a hill. "There," he said, and guided the horse toward it. Rain began in thick, cold drops that struck like pebbles, and by the time they reached the shelter, both were soaked through. He helped her down, his hands firm on her shoulders as the wind howled behind them. The small cave was barely large enough for the two of them, and the horse, but it offered a break from the storm. Eli tied the reins near the entrance and crouched to strike a spark, his flint trembling only slightly from the chill. The fire caught after the third try, its light flickering across the rough walls and their dripping clothes. Clara knelt near it, shivering. Steam rose from the hem of her dress, and she held her hands out toward the heat. "You should have left me before this," she said softly, her voice almost lost to the thunder outside. "You'd be halfway to town by now." He didn't look up. "And you'd be gone before morning," he said. "I don't quit halfway. You don't even know if I deserve help." "Nobody does," he replied, feeding another stick into the flames. "That's the point of giving it." She turned toward him, studying his face in the flickering light, the sharp lines worn soft by dust and rain, the calm in his eyes that didn't match the storm. "You talk like a preacher," she said, half smiling. "Just a man who's done more wrong than right," he answered, still trying to balance the scales. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out his blanket, and tossed it to her. "You'll freeze before sunrise." She shook her head. "You need it." "I've got the fire," he said. "Take it." She hesitated, then draped it around her shoulders, the weight of it carrying his scent. Leather, smoke, and the faint trace of wild grass. For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, rain pounded against the rocks, thunder rolling through the valley like the earth remembering its own voice. Inside, the fire crackled low, painting their faces in gold and shadow. "You said you ran from a wedding," he said finally, not as accusation but as simple truth. She stared into the flames. "I was supposed to marry a man who called me a burden before the vows were spoken. I thought God wouldn't notice if I disappeared." "And did he?" "I don't know," she said. "But you did." The admission hung between them, heavier than the storm. Eli leaned back against the wall, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes folks cross paths for no reason," he said. "Sometimes that's reason enough." The wind howled louder, and the fire sputtered, throwing sparks. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw a man worn by solitude but still choosing to care. "What'll you do when we reach the town?" she asked. "Find another trail," he said. "That's what I do." "And leave me there?" "That's what you'll do." She nodded, though something inside her ached at the thought. The storm raged on, but she felt warmth spreading through her chest, not from the fire, but from the quiet certainty that for the first time in years she wasn't running. She was being carried by someone who didn't ask for anything in return. When she finally closed her eyes, the thunder outside had softened to a distant hum, and Eli sat awake beside her, his gaze on the storm beyond the cave, guarding a peace he didn't think he still deserved. When dawn broke, it did so quietly, the storm leaving behind a silence so deep it almost felt like reverence. The air was cool, washed clean, and the world smelled of wet earth and cedar. The first rays of sunlight crept into the cave, touching the ash of last night's fire and the edges of the blanket that still lay over Clara's shoulders. She stirred, blinking against the light, her body stiff but warm. Eli sat at the cave's mouth, his hat pulled low, watching the valley below where mist still clung to the ground in thin ribbons. He had the stillness of someone born to loneliness, the kind that made solitude a language of its own. "You sleep all right?" he asked without turning. "Like I hadn't in years," she said, her voice rough from disuse. She stood slowly, folding the blanket with deliberate care before setting it beside him. "You didn't rest?" "Someone had to keep the fire," he replied. She looked outside, at the washed blue of the sky and the glimmer of puddles catching the sun. The world felt new, reborn from the night's violence. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Never is after rain," he said, then added, "But it looks that way for a while." They shared a faint smile before silence reclaimed the space between them. She knelt to wash her hands at a small pool near the entrance, the water cold enough to bite. Her reflection stared back, pale, thinner, her face carved by exhaustion but softer somehow, like the fear had been rinsed from her. "You really plan to leave me at the town?" she asked. "That's the plan," he said. "And you'll just keep riding?" "Always have." "You ever stop?" "Only when the horse needs water." His voice carried no sadness, only fact, but it unsettled her more than any confession could have. "There's more to living than not dying," she said. "Not out here," he answered. She didn't push further. The horse whinnied softly, nudging Eli's shoulder as if reminding him of the road waiting. He rubbed its neck, murmuring something that sounded half prayer, half apology. Clara watched, realizing how rarely she'd seen tenderness that didn't demand anything in return. When he turned back to her, his eyes met hers, and for a moment the world felt still again. "You'll be safe once we reach Silver Creek," he said. "Decent folk there or close enough." "And what will you tell them I am?" "A traveler," he said simply. "They won't ask more if I don't." "And if they do?" "Then I'll tell them you're under my word." She blinked, surprised. "Your word?" "Means they'll treat you like kin," he said, "or I'll have words back." "Why would you do that for me?" He hesitated, looking out towards the horizon where the light touched the wet ground in streaks of gold. "Because someone once did it for me," he said finally. She waited for him to explain, but he didn't. Instead, he packed his gear, cinched the saddle, and motioned for her to mount. The journey resumed in the hush after storms leave, where even the birds sound cautious. The road ahead was muddy, every step of the horse sinking deep, but it was easier to bear than the silence she'd known before meeting him. As the sun climbed, she began to hum softly, a tune she barely remembered from childhood. Eli said nothing, though his jaw eased, the faintest curve touching his mouth. When they stopped at noon beneath a cottonwood, she shared the last crumbs of their meal without being asked. He took it, ate in silence, then said, "You'll do fine on your own." "You don't know that," she said. "I know you made it this far," he replied. She looked at him then. the man who had lifted her from dust and shared hunger without hesitation, and realized he was right. Not because she was strong, but because he'd taught her mercy wasn't about who needed saving. It was about who refused to turn away. When they rode on, the light followed them, breaking through clouds as if the world itself was quietly keeping pace. They reached Silver Creek by mid-afternoon, when the heat had already begun to lift, and the shadows stretched long across the dirt road leading into town. It wasn't much to look at, just a scattering of wooden buildings baked to the same color as the land, a church with a leaning steeple, a general store, a saloon, and the low hum of people pretending life was easier than it was. The sound of the horses' hooves drew eyes, and Clara could feel the stares before she saw them. Men pausing mid-conversation, women at doorways pretending to tidy their aprons while watching. She pulled her shawl tighter, the weight of their judgment heavier than hunger ever had been. Eli rode ahead a few paces, shoulders squared, his presence enough to quiet the louder whispers. When they reached the livery, he dismounted and handed the reins to an old man who seemed to know him. "Eli Ward," the man said, voice gravelly. "Didn't expect you to come back this side of winter." "Didn't plan to," Eli said. "Need feed and water for the horse, and a room for the lady." The man's brow lifted, eyes sliding toward Clara before returning to Eli. "That a friend?" "Someone under my word," Eli said flatly. That seemed to end the conversation. The man just nodded, muttered something about the storm damage, and went to work. Clara stood awkwardly near the horse, unsure where to look. Eli turned to her. "You'll stay at the boarding house near the church. I'll square it." "You don't have to," she said, but he was already walking toward the main street. She followed, the boards creaking under her boots. The boarding house was a faded white structure with curtains that had once been lace. A woman in her 50s opened the door, her expression polite but guarded. "Afternoon," Eli said, tipping his hat. "Need a room for a few nights." "For you or the lady?" she asked, her eyes flicking between them. "For her," he said. "She's had a rough trail." The woman studied Clara, her gaze softening slightly. "You'll find rest here, dear," she said. "Room's $1 a night, 2 with meals." Eli handed her coins from his pocket. "2 then." "Meals served at 6, the woman said, stepping aside to let Clara in. But Clara hesitated, looking back at him. "You're not staying?" "Got things to tend to," he said. "You'll be all right." She wanted to ask what kind of things, wanted to ask where he'd go, but her throat tightened around the words. "Eli," she said softly. He stopped, meeting her eyes. "You should eat," he said. "You still look hungry." "What about you?" "I'll find something." Their silence stretched, full of all the words neither could afford to speak. Finally she nodded. "Thank you." He touched the brim of his hat again, the smallest of gestures, but it felt like an ending. Then he turned and walked back towards the road, his figure blending into the light. Inside, the boarding house smelled of soap and old wood. The woman, Mrs. Allen, led her to a small room upstairs with a single bed, a wash basin, and a window that looked out toward the hills. "You're lucky he found you," she said, as she handed over a towel. "Most men don't stop on that road." "I know," Clara said quietly. When she was alone, she sat on the edge of the bed, fingers tangled in her lap. Listening to the muffled sounds of the town below, laughter from the saloon, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, a hymn drifting from the open church door. She wondered if he could hear it, too. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in colors that hurt to look at. She went to the window and watched him disappear down the far street, his hat dark against the fading light. He didn't look back. Maybe he never would. Still, she whispered, "Ride safe," knowing he couldn't hear her but saying it anyway. Somewhere beyond the town, thunder murmured again, softer this time, like the sky itself was remembering mercy. The first night in Silver Creek passed with a restlessness Clara couldn't quiet. The bed was soft, the air still, yet sleep came in fragments. Faces she wanted to forget, roads she wanted to stay on, and a silence that sounded too much like his voice. By dawn, she was up again, washing her face in the cold basin water and watching the town wake through the small window. Men led mules toward the mill, a woman swept her porch, and the church bell tolled once, its hollow echo rolling through the valley like something trying to remember its purpose. Downstairs, Mrs. Allen served her breakfast, bread, coffee, and eggs fried hard, but the taste turned to dust in her mouth. She paid anyway, thanked her, and stepped into the morning sun. The streets were already alive with motion, though no one looked twice at her now. The dress she wore hung looser, her posture steadier, but she still felt the eyes that lingered when they thought she wasn't watching. Across the road stood the church, the same one she'd glimpsed from her window, its door open, a single candle burning inside. She hesitated, then crossed, her boots leaving prints in the soft mud. The preacher inside was a thin man with a tired face and kind eyes. He looked up from his sweeping when she entered. "You're early for service," he said. "I'm not here for service," she replied. "Just thought I'd sit a while." He nodded toward the pews. "Sit as long as you need. The walls don't mind quiet company." She took a seat near the back, hands folded, staring at the worn altar. For a long time she said nothing, her thoughts heavy but not hopeless. She thought about Eli, his quiet hands, his tired kindness. The way he never asked what she owed him. It was easier to believe in mercy when he was near, harder now that he was gone. When she rose to leave, the preacher spoke again. "You traveling alone?" "Not by choice," she said, "but maybe that's how it was meant." He studied her a moment, then smiled faintly. "God sends company even on empty roads. Sometimes it just walks beside you long enough for you to stand." She nodded, thanked him, and stepped outside. The light had shifted, warm now, catching on the dust that hung in the air like memory. Across the street she saw movement near the livery, Eli's horse tied to the post, his hat visible through the open door. Her heart jumped before she could stop it. She crossed quickly, mud splashing her skirt. He was inside, checking the saddle girth, his back turned. "You came back," she said. Breathless. He looked over his shoulder, surprised but calm. "Never left," he said. "Had to trade for new shoes on the horse. I thought you'd gone." "You sound disappointed." "Maybe I am," she said, half smiling. He returned the expression, small but real. "Town treating you fair?" "As fair as I let them," she said. "And you?" "Still hungry," he said, reaching into his coat and handing her a wrapped parcel. "Brought this. Figured you'd skip breakfast." She opened it, bread and a piece of dried apple. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said. They stood there for a moment, the kind of quiet that makes words feel unnecessary. Finally she said, "You'll leave soon, won't you?" He nodded. "There's work east and winter's coming." "You'll ride alone again?" "Always do." She hesitated, then said softly, "You could stay. There's work here, too." He met her gaze, the warmth in his eyes dimming with something heavier. "If I stay, I become part of things. That's not who I am." "And who are you, Eli Ward?" she asked. "A man who stops when someone's fallen," he said, "and keeps moving when they can stand again." The words hit her like the wind after a storm. Cold but clean. She wanted to argue, to make him see that maybe she hadn't quite learned to stand. But she knew better. He'd already given her everything he could, and she'd already taken more than she meant to. So she smiled, nodded once, and said, "Then I suppose I should start walking." He tipped his hat. "Guess you already have." When he mounted his horse and rode toward the open road, she didn't call after him. Some goodbyes didn't need sound. The wind carried enough of them already. By the second morning, Silver Creek no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a mirror showing her everything she still feared to face. Clara tried to fill the hours, helping Mrs. Allen wash linens, sweeping the porch, fetching water from the well. But the silence between tasks pressed heavy, carrying the memory of hoofbeats fading into distance. Near midday, shouts erupted from the main street, the kind that cut straight through routine. She turned and saw a crowd gathering near the saloon, their voices sharp with anger. A man staggered into view, his coat torn, blood trickling from his lip. Behind him came another, broad, red-faced, the kind of man who mistook size for power. "Thief!" he bellowed, grabbing the smaller man by the collar. "Caught him trying to steal my purse horse." The accused shook his head weakly. "Just loosened the reins, sir. She was choking in the heat." The crowd murmured, eager for spectacle. Clara felt her stomach turn. It was always the same, the strong shouting loud enough to make guilt sound true. She stepped forward without thinking, but Mrs. Allen caught her wrist. "Don't," she whispered. "That's Gage Miller, owns half the land north of the creek. You don't want trouble." Clara hesitated, then saw the preacher stepping from the church steps, hands raised for peace. "Mr. Miller," he called, "let the man speak before you judge him." Miller spat in the dirt. "A man who steals a horse don't need words." He raised his hand, and for a heartbeat Clara thought he meant to strike. Then another voice cut through the noise, steady, low, unmistakable. "Then maybe you should stop talking before you start lying." The crowd turned. Eli Ward stood at the edge of the street, dust on his boots, eyes narrowed beneath his hat brim. He walked forward with that same quiet authority she remembered from the storm, his calm more dangerous than anger. "I seen the whole thing," he said. "The horse stumbled. Man tried to steady it, that's all." Miller's face darkened. "You calling me a liar, Ward?" "No," Eli said, stopping within arm's reach. "Just blind." The words were soft, but they landed heavy. The tension hung like heat before lightning. Miller's hand twitched toward the knife on his belt, but Eli didn't flinch. "You'll want to think about that," he said. "You draw steel here, you'll lose more than pride." The preacher moved between them, voice trembling but brave. "Enough, both of you." Miller glared, muttered a curse, and shoved the smaller man away. "You watch your back, Ward," he said, then stormed off, the crowd slowly dispersing with the thrill drained from them. Eli turned to the man, helped him to his feet, checked the horse's reins, and said nothing more. When it was over, Clara found herself moving toward him before she realized it. "You came back again," she said quietly. "Didn't plan to," he said. "Guess I ain't good at leaving things half done." "You saved him." "He didn't need saving," Eli said. "Just someone who'd stand still long enough for the truth to breathe." She watched him, her heart heavy with something that wasn't sadness exactly, something closer to gratitude too deep for words. "You could have been killed," she said. "Wouldn't be the first time someone tried," he replied, "and yet you still do it." "If I stop being who I am." The wind caught the edge of her shawl, snapping it like a flag. "You ever wish the world didn't need saving?" she asked. "Every day," he said, "but wishing don't feed a horse." She laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. The tension eased. "You're staying tonight," she said, more a statement than question. He hesitated, then nodded. "One night. Enough to see things calm. And after that?" "You already know," he said. She looked at him in the fading light, the man who never asked for thanks and never waited for it. "Maybe the road needs you more than you need it," she whispered. "Maybe," he said. "But someone's got to walk it." The church bell rang again, soft and low, and the sound seemed to settle the dust between them. She wanted to speak. To tell him he'd become the answer to a prayer she didn't know she'd made, but when she looked up, he was already walking toward the livery, hat in hand, the dying sun turning his silhouette into something the land itself would remember long after he was gone. That evening the town exhaled the tension it had been holding all day, and a quiet peace settled over Silver Creek, fragile but real. The saloon's piano played slow, off-key notes that drifted through the air like tired laughter, and the lamplight spilled across the muddy street, softening its edges. Clara sat on the porch of the boarding house, her shawl pulled close, watching the night deepen. She could see the church steeple framed against a sky heavy with stars, and thought about how strange it was to feel safe in a place that had once felt so far from mercy. Across the road, Eli was helping the liveryman mend a broken gate. Sleeves rolled up, his voice low and steady. He moved like a man who belonged to the land itself, never rushing, never wasting motion. When the work was done, he brushed his hands clean and walked toward her. The faint smile on his face made of exhaustion and something quieter. Peace, maybe, or relief. "Gate won't give anyone trouble now," he said. "Mrs. Allen'll be glad," she replied, rising. "Supper's still warm if you want some." He hesitated, tipping his hat back. "I don't usually eat indoors." "Then call it sharing company instead," she said. That made him smile, and for the first time it reached his eyes. They sat together on the porch steps while the town grew still. She passed him a tin plate with stew and half a biscuit, and though he didn't eat much, he seemed grateful. "You ever think about stopping?" she asked quietly. "You'd do well as a sheriff or a preacher." "Never been good at telling folks what to do," he said. "And preaching don't suit a man who's still learning what he believes." "And what do you believe?" "That people are kinder than they remember being," he said after a moment, "and crueler when they forget." She turned that over, letting it settle. The wind moved softly between them, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. "You talk like someone who's seen both." "I have," he said. "But mercy sticks longer than hate, if you let it." She watched him as he spoke, his profile outlined in the lamplight, the rough edge of his jaw, the scar near his temple, the eyes that had seen too much and still chose gentleness. "You didn't have to come back today," she said. "Could have kept riding." "Could have," he agreed. "But I figured the world's already got enough men who keep riding." "And when you leave again?" "Then you remember what to do when someone else falls," he said. "That's the only thing worth passing on." The words hung between them like the last note of a hymn. She wanted to tell him that she already had, that something in her had changed the day he lifted her from the dirt. But the sound of crickets filled the space instead. "You'll leave at dawn," she said. "I will." "You'll ride hungry again." He smiled faintly. "That's how I ride best." She laughed then, soft and genuine. "You're the strangest man I've ever met." "Good," he said. "Maybe you'll remember me longer." They sat in silence after that, watching the stars burn brighter. When she finally stood to go inside, she paused at the door, turning back. "Eli?" He looked up. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just keep walking." She nodded, then disappeared inside. Eli stayed a while longer, staring at the horizon where the darkness met the faintest silver line of dawn yet to come. When he finally rose, he walked down to the river that edged the town and filled his canteen. The moonlight shimmered on the water like a road that never ended, and he stood there, hat in hand, the weight of miles pressing against his shoulders. Tomorrow he would ride again, because that was who he was, but tonight he allowed himself the quiet luxury of rest. In the window above the boarding house, Clara's lamp flickered once and went out, and though she didn't see it, Eli smiled faintly into the dark, whispering words only the wind could carry. "You're standing now." The dawn came soft and golden over Silver Creek, brushing the rooftops in light so gentle it almost felt like forgiveness. The storm that had threatened days ago was gone now, leaving behind a silence that hummed with the small sounds of life beginning again. The creak of wagon wheels, the lowing of cattle in the fields, the first hammer strike at the smithy. Clara woke before the bell, drawn by something she couldn't name, and went to the window. The road stretched east, dusty and empty, but she knew he would take it. She dressed quickly, buttoning her faded dress with trembling hands, and slipped downstairs before Mrs. Allen stirred. The town was quiet, the air cool, the world holding its breath. She found him near the livery, tightening the cinch strap on his saddle with the practiced ease of a man who had already said his goodbyes in silence. "You're leaving," she said, though it wasn't a question. He looked up, his expression unreadable in the half-light. "Sun's good for riding." "So is staying," she said softly. He smiled, small but true. "Not for me." She stepped closer, every word heavy in her chest. "You'll just keep walking roads until there's nothing left of you." "Maybe that's how I make peace," he said, "by not holding what isn't mine to keep." She wanted to be angry, to tell him that mercy didn't have to wander, that sometimes it could rest. But when she looked at him, she saw something too pure to fight. "Do you even know what you gave me?" she asked. "No," he said, adjusting the reins. "And I don't need to." She swallowed hard. "Then let me say it anyway." "You already did," he said, eyes soft. "When you stood up." He mounted, the leather creaking under his weight, the horse shifting easily beneath him. For a long moment they just stared at each other, the morning light painting the space between them in gold. "Will you ever come back?" she asked. "If the trail turns this way again," he said. "And if it doesn't? Then you'll know where I went." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out something small, a folded scrap of cloth. "Left over from my old trail map," he said, handing it to her. "Don't follow it. Just keep it, so you remember the road runs both ways." She took it carefully, the edges frayed, her fingers brushing his. "What if I forget you?" she whispered. He shook his head. "You won't. Not because of me, but because mercy never really leaves. It just changes faces." He tipped his hat, that same quiet gesture that had carried her from shame into dignity. "You take care, Clara May." "You too, Eli Ward." The words caught in her throat as he turned the horse toward the open plain. The sun climbed higher, and with each step he grew smaller against the horizon until he was nothing but movement, a figure carved out of light and dust. She stood there long after he was gone, the wind tugging gently at her hair, the cloth still warm in her hand. Behind her, the church bell rang once, a slow, low sound that echoed across the valley like a benediction. She walked to the edge of town where the road curved east and looked down at the earth, marked by the tracks of his horse and her own boots beside them. For the first time, she understood what he meant about mercy. It wasn't something you chased. It was something you carried, mile by mile, until it became part of your step, The sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of night. Clara turned back toward Silver Creek, the small town that had once been only a stop and now felt like a beginning. She would stay, she decided, not because she couldn't go, but because someone had to keep the road open for whoever came next. And as she walked, the dust rose behind her in a faint golden swirl that shimmered like memory, like promise, like the quiet trail of a man who'd ridden away hungry and left the world a little more full. If this story reminded you that mercy doesn't need words, just courage, then let it stay with you a while. Please like, share, and subscribe to Echoes of the West, where every story remembers the quiet acts that save us. Tell us in the comments, do you think mercy belongs to those who walk away, or those who stay behind and keep the road open?